Before I do start this video, make sure to use my TCG player affiliate down below if you're looking for any of these singles that I talk about today. Also, this channel is sponsored by Arcane Fortress. If you're looking for the best deck boxes around, make sure to use my link down below in the description to check them out. One other way you can support the channel is by becoming a patron. There are some great benefits of being a patron to the channel, such as giveaways, deck advice, and more when you do join. Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today on PubStomp MTG, and in this video today I'm going to go over a Modern Horizons 3 commander that honestly packs a punch. And the commander I am referring to is Imskir Iron Eater. So this one is pretty incredible. I love Rakdos color combinations, so I'm a sucker for it already. And plus it is from Kaldheim 2, which I'm pretty sure it's from Kaldheim. It looks like a Kaldheim demon and it doesn't have any wings, so I'm pretty sure it's from Kaldheim. So let's first read what it does. So for 6 black and a red, legendary creature demon, affinity for artifacts, and when it does enter the battlefield you draw X cards and you lose X life, where X is half the number of artifacts you control rounded down. Plus it does have an activated ability by paying 3 and a red, sacrifice an artifact. Imskir deals damage equal to its sacrifice artifact's mana value to any target. So if this does sound familiar, it's pretty much just Bosch reskinned, but honestly a lot better, and you're using an extra color in commanders, so sorry Bosch, you were good, but you just got power creeped out by Imskir. But seriously, this is pretty incredible. Having affinity for artifacts is pretty crazy. If you have like 6 artifacts on the battlefield, this will just be reduced to just red and a black. So as a 5/5 body entering the battlefield, possibly for 2 mana, and also when it does enter the battlefield, if you do have those 6 artifacts on the battlefield, you will draw 3 cards and lose 3 life. Again, all for 2 mana. I know you have to have an artifact setup, but this again is pretty powerful. There's definitely a lot of ways we could abuse this, and it does have a wig con staple to it. When you do sacrifice an artifact, you could just deal damage equal to that artifact's mana value. So this is absolutely explosive. This could get on the battlefield very early on, depending on how much artifacts you do have on the battlefield. So seriously, this is probably one of my favorite commanders of the entire set. And with all that said, let's get it started. Let's talk about the deck. So let's first talk about synergistic cards of our deck. Of course, Imskir is a huge mana cost of 8, and also we do have an artifact sub-theme because of course we want to get it out as fast as we can. Some early game options I do want to bring your attention to is Ichor Wellspring and Liquid Metal Torque. Ichor Wellspring is a great option because when it enters the battlefield or goes into the graveyard, you get a draw card. So we can put it onto the battlefield in the early game, make our commander cheaper. Then later on, when our commander enters the battlefield, it could count as one of those artifacts we could draw a card with our commander. We could sacrifice it later on with our commander's ability to deal 2 damage to any target and draw a card. And Liquid Metal Torque is going to be an all-star in this deck because of course it could turn anything into an artifact, including our own commander. So just in case if we're out of options and we have a lot of artifacts on our battlefield, we could just sacrifice our commander to its own ability, deal a lot of damage to one of our opponent's creatures or their face, and then later on cast it for a reducted cost depending on how much artifacts we do have on the battlefield, then get that ETB of drawing cards and losing life, and then repeat the process if we needed to. Also, because we are playing a lot of artifacts, we might as well get some tempo in our game plan using Shimmermere and Liberator Urza's Battlethopter. I mainly like these 2 options because they do have flash themselves, so that we could cast this at instant speed, and we could cast other artifacts at instant speed as well, so that we could have our commander eat them and then spit them out at our opponents. Also, if you are a true degenerate, you could absolutely run Dockset Extortionist. Totally not broken, especially in this deck when our commander depends on the amount of artifacts you do have on the battlefield to be cheaper. Yeah, totally not that great. But since you are an artifact package, you might as well take advantage of the Planeswalker Duretti. Both versions are absolutely fantastic. I don't know why, they're just complete contrasts to each other. Duretti Scrap Savant has that amazing -2 ability to sacrifice an artifact. If you do return target artifact from your graveyard to the battlefield, that's perfect because if we just sacrifice a little artifact on our battlefield, we could get a big giant artifact creature on the battlefield instead. And the other version of Duretti is possibly even better for us because it does have the ability to constantly make artifact creature tokens on the battlefield to reduce our commander's mana cost. And plus it can act as removal with that -1 ability. But next up, I do want to talk about synergy with your commander because of course it's a high CMC. There's a lot of options that we can take advantage of in our deck. So for example, Stinging Suddy is a great option mainly because you draw X cards and you lose X life, where X is the mana value of the commander you own in the battlefield or in the command zone. So because our commander has a mana value of 8, we'll draw 8 cards and lose 8 life. I know 8 life seems like a lot, but you are drawing 8 cards. That's a whole new hand. The Vision cycle with Visions of Ruin and Visions of Dread is an excellent option, mainly because of that flashback option. If they are in the graveyard, they will cost less based off the commander's mana value, so basically they each will just cost 2 mana. Visions of Ruin is excellent because it does make our opponent sacrifice an artifact, and for each artifact sacrificed this way, you get to create a treasure token, so potentially you can make 3 treasure tokens off of this. And with Visions of Dread, you could reanimate a target creature from your graveyard onto the battlefield of your opponent's choice. Next up, a very similar card to Stinging Study is Imposing Grandeur. It's basically a wheel effect, but for the mana value of each opponent's commander. So for example, with you'll be able to draw 8 cards, and if somebody has a 2 CMC commander, they'll only just draw 2 cards. So I would say in most cases, you're most likely going to get the most benefit out of this, drawing the most cards. Going to a different route with our commander in synergy with it, Basilisk Collar is excellent. It's a 1 mana artifact, so it can reduce the mana cost of our commander, and it does have equipped creature has Death Touch and Lifelink. And let's just say, for example, Basilisk Collar is equipped to our commander. If we do have, say for example, a 6 CMC artifact on the battlefield, we do sacrifice with our commander and deal damage to somebody. We could also gain some life, but if we also do throw it at like a 12/12, as long as it doesn't have indestructible, we could kill it because our commander will have Death Touch dealing damage. Because we are sacrificing a lot of artifacts, we could take advantage of Scrap Trawler. For 3 mana, it does have that ability whenever it or another artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return to your hand target artifact in your graveyard with lesser mana value. So there is a lot of various mana values of artifacts in our deck, so this might be a good option for you just to get a little bit more value. But now let's talk about the chunky artifacts. A lot of you probably been wondering what kind of chunky artifacts you should put in your deck. Well, there's a lot of great ones. First up, Cauldron of Eternity is fantastic. It's a high CMC artifact of 12, but it can be reduced based off the amount of creatures you do have in your graveyard. And it does offer you a couple things when it's on the battlefield. Whenever a creature you control dies, put it on the bottom of its owner's library. And you can pay 2 and a black and pay 2 life. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, only as a sorcery though. So this is better in the late game if I'm being quite honest, but if you can reduce it just to 2 black mana, this is going to be excellent. Because later on you could just sacrifice this to your commander and deal 12 damage to anything. What's better than that? Well, I do mean Ugin's Nexus is going to be a really good card. It can get you an extra turn when you do sacrifice it to your commander's ability. You'll deal 5 damage to any target. This is going to be another excellent card in the deck too. But maybe the best card would be the One Ring, mainly because it just is an absolute monster of an advantage engine, drawing you so much cards. But if you have too much advantage and you're using a lot of life and you could potentially lose the next turn, you can sacrifice the One Ring if you needed to your commander. Wormcoil Engine can be another great option for you, mainly because it does have Death Touch Lifelink as a 6/6 body. That by itself has great stats, but when it does die, you just make 2 worm tokens that have Death Touch and one has Lifelink. So this one definitely has a great death trigger. Speaking of death trigger, Solemn Simulacrum is another great option. You can put this on the battlefield early game on, reduce your mana cost of your commander, get a basic land to ramp, and then when it does die, you get to draw a card. Another fun dice trigger would be Ruin Grinder. This is excellent. I have this in my Megatron deck, and honestly, Megatron kind of works very similar with this commander, by the way, but Ruin Grinder is a great option just to refill our hand. Of course, each player will discard their hand and draw 7 cards, so it is a wheel effect for everybody else. But if you do need mana early game on, if you're land screwed, you could just mountain cycle this so that you could get a land and just put it onto the battlefield. Following that, I do want to mention Metalwork Colossus, mainly because this card will be reduced based off of the non-creature artifacts you do control. Plus, not to mention, it is 11 CMC. If anything else, we could just put this on the battlefield, immediately just sacrifice it to our commander, and then deal 11 damage to any target. But if you want to see nuts, look at Cybermen Squadron. This is incredible, mainly because non-legendary artifact creatures you control have Myriad. So this card is absolutely cracked, especially the more non-legendary artifact creatures you do have on the battlefield, the more you can swing for exponential damage. Especially if they do have dice trigger. Say for example you have a Wormcoil Engine on the battlefield, you swing in with that, you make 2 copies on the battlefield. Then what you could do in response before they do get exiled, you can just sacrifice them. They retain that mana value because they're copies of Wormcoil Engine. You could pay that mana with your commander to sacrifice those 2 Wormcoil Engines to deal 6 damage each, and then make a bunch of Wormcoil Engine tokens. But I would say probably the best card you can be playing in your deck is Mycosynth Golem, mainly because it does have affinity for artifacts, so very similar to your commander, but it doesn't have a mana cost of like a red and a black, so it's just colorless. You could just basically cast this for free if you do have 11 artifacts on the battlefield. And artifact creature spells you cast have affinity for artifacts too, so all those other artifact creatures that I've talked about previously, yeah, they're going to get affinity too. So this is going to be absolutely nuts in the deck. Plus, if anything else, if you don't have anything else going on, you could just sacrifice your Mycosynth Golem to your commander and then again deal 11 damage. I'm going to repeat that a lot. But let's move on. Let's talk about winning the game, and let's do it in the old-fashioned way of losing your friends by giving your commander infect. So a quick way you could throw off your opponents and potentially win the game, or at least make one of your opponents lose the game, is using Tainted Strike. You can surprise a lot of people if you go ahead and swing in with your commander. If there weren't any blocks, you could cast Tainted Strike and then make it have infect and be a 6/5. And then what you could do also is sacrifice an artifact. Let's just say it's for CMC. You can just sacrifice it to your commander's ability and deal 4 infect damage to that same opponent, giving them 10 poison counters. So this could be pretty powerful, but also pretty salt-inducing. There's a constant way we could give our commander infect, and that's enchanting him with, for example, Glistening Oil and Phyresis. Personally, Glistening Oil is a great recurable way where we could constantly put infect on our commander, and honestly, it might seem like a downside at the beginning of your upkeep, put a -1/-1 counter on an enchanted creature like our commander, but eventually when our commander does die, it'll just go back to our command zone. If we do have enough artifacts, we could just recast it for maybe 2 mana only, and then we could potentially draw a decent amount of cards off of its ETB. Then we could repeat the process of putting Glistening Oil back on our commander and then deal a lot of infect damage that way by sacrificing our artifacts. And Phyresis is basically the same thing as Glistening Oil minus those last 2 abilities that Glistening Oil does have. But one of the better options that you can choose from to give your commander infect is Grafted Exoskeleton, mainly because it is an artifact. This will reduce the mana cost of your commander and you could equip it for 2, and then your commander will have +2/+2 and infect. It does also have the ability, whenever it does become attached to a permanent, sacrifice that permanent. That might seem like a downside, but like Glistening Oil, it's not going to be really a downside for a commander, especially if we have a lot of artifacts on the battlefield. If anything else, if you do have a lot of artifacts on the battlefield, you could just equip Grafted Exoskeleton to another creature. That way you could just sacrifice your commander, return it to the command zone, potentially have it cast for 2 or maybe a little bit more, but not by much if you do have a lot of artifacts on the battlefield. Then with your commander's ETB, depending on how much artifacts show on the battlefield, you could refill your hand if you need to. But going back to infect, it's pretty salt-inducing to a lot of people. I would forewarn you, if you do go this route, you may lose your friends. Maybe not, maybe, I don't know, we'll see. However, that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on Imskir Iron Eater. This is going to be a pretty powerful commander, and honestly, I could see it being a pretty popular one as well to a lot of different people. Of course, it does have the reference to Bosch, but it does have a lot more upside compared to Bosch because, of course, it does have a black mana symbol in it, and it also does reduce its cost, and it does draw you cards, so it's a lot better for sure. But I would love to hear from you. Make sure to leave a comment down below. What are your thoughts about Imskir Iron Eater? I do think it's a pretty powerful commander. Also, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stopping by.